does that. Everyone does it. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. America is home to many international piano prodigies, but not all of them have been invited to continue studies here by a titan of the piano world, Emanuel Ax. And few have been inspired by the worlds of black holes and gravitational waves. But my guest today is one such young man, and he has the added crown of being the 2018 winner of the prestigious Honens International Piano Competition. I am speaking of Nicolas Namoradze, a pianist who has something to say through his well-rounded vision of each musical piece that he lives within. So it is no surprise that the Honens competition, which takes place every 3 years, has proudly awarded Nicolas Namoradze the Laureate Prize. As the Calgary-based competition proudly boasts, their competition discovers and nurtures complete artists for the 21st century. And with his curiosity, sense of wonder, and fleshing out of the music that he tackles, we see the complete artist emerging. The New York Times says of this artist, sparkling, sensitive, and coloristic. The Wall Street Journal has called Nicolas Namoradze's playing simply gorgeous. And his own teacher, Emanuel Ax, calls him an extraordinary artist. I am thrilled to have Nicolas Namoradze with me today on Center Stage. Good morning and welcome, Nico, for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for the lovely intro.
Oh, you're most welcome. I'm actually relieved to see that you are mortal.
Oh, well,
Because
it's a useful feature.
a useful feature. Already you have climbed so many mountains and done
Wow.
so well, so many international competitions, now the winner of the Honens. Are you feeling pretty good about this?
Yes, of course I am. I'm still coming to terms with the implications of this prize and everything it's going to bring, of course, because along with the cash prize, I get this 3-year artist development program, and that's really what's so incredible about this competition. And I'm really starting to see just how much of a jumpstart it is going to give my career.
So can you be more specific about what the Honens competition is going to offer you and how they nurture you?
Well, so they give management, and they will be organizing many concerts for me around the globe. I am also working with an extraordinary manager here in New York, together with the Honens team. I will be getting mentorship, a lot of guidance from the Honens team. We will be promoting what I'm doing in a number of ways and with different avenues, and really putting me together with different teams of people that will help my career in many meaningful ways, whether it is with preparing things like press kits and those kinds of materials, or establishing important relationships with concert organizers and conductors. I mean, this is really the most important facet of beginning one's career and one's life in music as a performer. And I just couldn't be luckier for the opportunities that lie ahead.
This is so wonderful, because these are the business things that young emerging artists need to have their hands on. It's been given to you now.
Absolutely, and Honens is very clear and pragmatic, and they understand what the artist role should be in the 21st century very well, from a number of perspectives. So this whole idea of the complete artist is very much a response to the world we live in today. A world in which performers should be comfortable engaging with their audiences verbally, where performers should be ready to go out and engage with new audiences, a world where performers should be able to derive inspiration from a variety of sources and show this to their piano playing, and don't just sit and practice 12 hours a day in a practice room and let their existence really be limited to that. So that's how they approach the question from one end, but from the other end, in terms of actually promoting and marketing and doing all this kind of stuff, which is an absolutely necessary part of what one does, Honens is really pulling out all the stops for their laureate and making sure that their winner really gets these essential opportunities to give them a strong foothold in this very, very volatile world.
That's right. You need that PR, don't you?
You really do. You really do.
So where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Georgia, the country.
Not the state.
Yes. But my family moved to Budapest when I was only a few months old. So I grew up in Hungary, and my musical training began in Hungary. And it was a very particular kind of musical training, and I, grew up on a diet of many great Hungarian composers such as Bartók and Ligeti and Kurtág, as well as Liszt, of course, but everyone plays Liszt. But yes, I had a quite unique musical upbringing, so to speak, and I think this very much informed some aspects of my artistic profile, especially my composing, actually, even more so than as a pianist.
But how were you drawn to music? Were your parents musicians, or were they just offering you that platform?
So interestingly enough, my father is a constitutional lawyer, my mother's a social scientist. So non-musicians, but my mother did play as a child, and that's definitely where the musical talent came from.
Did I read that you were always drawn to listening to operatic recordings as a child?
Yes. Actually, as an infant, I'd get stuck to the record player listening to Verdi and Wagner, and they could not pull me away from it. And then I had varying musical interests, actually, in my childhood before I actually began playing the piano at the age of 7. That was my first instrument and the first time I started learning music actively. But until then, I had many musical obsessions, including things like the Beatles and AC/DC for a period of time. So my tastes were much less conservative as a young child than they were.
Well, that's normal.
After I actually began playing the piano, after which classical music was pretty much all I was interested in, and is still pretty much the case. I mean, I do appreciate other musical forms and jazz especially, but I still very much live within the classical music world. I only play classical music. Many of my colleagues are very comfortable playing jazz and all that, but I'm not one of them. I'm not one of them.
You can admire it, but you don't
I
have
admire
to partake.
it, but I don't
It is a
partake
very complex
in it.
form. So
Absolutely.
what was the moment when you first realized that this was going to be your life?
I think pretty much as soon as I started playing, it became very clear that this is something I want to be doing.
You were quite young.
Yes, I was 7, but things really accelerated. It's very interesting. Once I got to college age, so I was graduating high school, the only decision that I really had to make was, do I go to a conservatory or do I do a double degree with music and something else? I hadn't really thought of, not doing music. So I went the conservatory route, and I very much regretted it. I very much...
Why?
Well, so interestingly enough, I realized that all these other things that I had been doing were making me a better musician and pianist.
Ah, okay.
And sitting and having nothing else to do but practice was not doing me any favors. So actually, the best thing that I got from my undergraduate studies was actually the compulsory philosophy, aesthetics, and ethics classes that I had to take at the university. I felt that, that was perhaps the most enriching experience.
And that enriched your music,
yes,
enriched
so
you as an individual.
not because I wasn't interested enough in what I was doing and I needed other things to distract myself. I was simply a better musician thanks to all these other things.
That's fantastic to hear.
And that's why then I made sure to take my non-musical education into my own hands and read a lot and do all that. And since then I've been making up for this in many ways. I mean, I recently was taking classes in Columbia on subjects like, there was one class on, say, neuroscience and Buddhism, which I found fascinating, for example.
Is that left brain activity with you, isn't it?
Right.
The balance.
So it very much is, and I only started composing a few years ago, but I realized once I started that this is something I should have been doing all along.
Oh, okay.
And I did scribble a lot as a child, but then it kind of fell to the wayside in my teenage years. And now that I'm back to it, I feel that I'm simply not only a better musician, but even a better pianist when I'm doing these other things as well.
I can imagine that's true.
Yeah.
And I've read that you have been influenced, of course, by your folk music.
Oh, yes.
From Georgia. How has that influenced you when you're performing?
It's influenced me less in my performing than in my composing. So it was something I always listened to growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say this out of any nationalist fervor, but I really do think that Georgian folk music is one of the musical wonders of the world.
Really? Why?
Because it is a musical tradition that came to tonal harmony from a completely different route, and actually earlier than tonal harmony became established in Western Europe.
Oh, okay.
Because what's very interesting about Georgian folk music is the relative lack of instrumental music. It was almost entirely vocal.
Okay.
And that meant that the tuning system had very little to do with what we would call, well or equal tempering.
Right.
Because, of course, if one gets a string and then splits it in half and then into a quarter, one will get the series of overtones.
Of course.
But in Georgian folk music, there is no octave. There's no stable octave.
Mm-hmm.
The most stable interval is the third.
Mm-hmm.
And you stack two thirds on top of each other and you get a triad.
Mm-hmm.
So there was triadic harmony in Georgian folk music in the 11th century, in the 10th, 11th century.
Interesting.
Where we still had organum in doubling and fifths for a few more centuries before tonal harmony really became established in Western Europe. So it's a very different approach to tonal harmony, of course.
Okay.
Or I'm using this word tonal because there are clear, tonal elements, but perhaps triadic would be a slightly more, precise term for it. And also Georgian folk music has a number of other features that's fascinating. The country is very mountainous, so each region had little communication with neighboring regions, so there's great diversity. Each region has such an individual style of folk music, and they're wildly different. And the other thing is that it's incredibly complex. Georgian polyphony we can have four-part harmony, there is great independence among the lines, and the complexity of the way in which they interact and the resulting simultaneities, the harmonies that you hear, is quite astonishing. And the vocal virtuosity that is required to perform this is also quite astonishing. So, as this had been a part of my musical life, throughout my entire life, but when I started composing, that's really when it began exerting an influence on my activities, because it of course influenced the kind of music I was writing, and perhaps not to the extent that I started transcribing Georgian folk songs, though I did do that as well, but certain aspects of the way it treats polyphony and counterpoint certainly very much influenced my own approach.
Very, very interesting. I like this. Did you take these ideas to John Corigliano, who you studied composition with?
Oh yes, and I did work on one piece with him, actually, a sonata for violin and piano, which is one of the pieces of mine that are perhaps most closely related to Georgian folk music. So he certainly got to hear a lot of Georgian folk music, which I would take and show him. I tend to do this a lot,
That's a treat, I would think.
And he certainly witnessed or saw this music through my lens, so to say, and saw how it was that I thought about this, how I analyzed it, and what it was that I derived from it in my own music.
This is really interesting to me because you moved to Budapest so soon.
Yes.
And this stayed with you, this element of your homeland.
Oh, certainly. I mean, Georgian is still my mother tongue, and I
Mhm.
speak Georgian with my parents,
Mhm.
and I still felt Georgian.
Yeah.
I'm not really one for very great national identity. If someone asked me what am I, I'd probably say I'm a European New Yorker. That's what I feel like more than anything. But I certainly do feel Georgian. I do, because that is the kind of perhaps because of the music, actually, as much as anything,
Mhm.
because I was so drawn to Georgian folk music and, of course, Georgian folk dance, but there was this connection with the folk music that I felt was very strong, and that was one of the things that tied me very strongly to the country I was born in,
Yeah.
interestingly enough.
But these sensory experiences leave an indelible mark on us as
Absolutely.
musicians.
Oh, absolutely.
It is inescapable. Now, when did you first meet Emanuel Ax?
Interestingly enough, I met him as a teenager in Budapest. I played for him, and that's when he said, come over to Juilliard. I didn't move for my undergraduate for a number of reasons, but I came for my master's, and I've been in New York ever since.
Were you excited when he approached you?
Oh yes, I mean I had admired him. He had been an idol of mine for so long that, of course, that was a dream come true.
Mm-hmm. We're glad you're here.
Oh,
Let's
so am I.
listen. Let's listen to a little bit more of Nicolas Namoradze. We're going to hear a movement from the Brahms Second Piano Concerto. Now, I've read that you've been influenced as a composer by black holes, other physical phenomena, like the Einstein's theory of relativity, gravitational waves. Where does this come from, Nicholas?
Well, that was actually for a very specific commission from the Chelsea Music Festival, a very interesting festival in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one season where the theme was gravity, because it was an anniversary of Newton's laws of
Mm-hmm.
physics,
Mm-hmm.
The publication of his thesis, and they wanted me to write a piece that would somehow tie in with the theme. So I tried to come up with a way of doing this that would perhaps not be too contrived or forced, and find a way to translate these physical concepts into musical ideas in a meaningful manner. And one model I looked to for this was Ligeti, because he was very much influenced by many mathematical concepts such as fractals or chaos theory, but he didn't do it just to make the audience think that, oh, he's so smart, he knows these things, but rather what kind of interesting dramatic narrative can I craft from these ideas? So, for example, with something like chaos theory, one thing that you get a lot of in Ligeti is you have some kind of system that starts off in an orderly manner, and then there's one glitch, something that gets in the cogwheel, so to say, and makes everything start spinning out of control. And that's a very absorbing and impressive dramatic effect. It's not just that we're trying to translate something mathematically into music for the sake of it, but that it creates a new kind of narrative. And this is what I tried to do. So whether it was this idea that, for example, time changes depending on how close one is to an object of large gravitational mass. For example, this could influence how certain musical motifs transform as they move in space on the stage, for example. So, you know, that's one idea. And so that's what I tried to look for. What kind of ideas and what kind of theories might translate into interesting, purely musical effects that will stand on their own convincingly without needing further explanation to make them seem convincing. Because I really do believe that the music should be able to speak for itself and shouldn't require extra information for it to seem convincing. So that was certainly the objective there.
You're also very inspired by the visual, and I know you have scored for film.
Yes.
What is your inspiration in mind for film scoring? How does it differ from all the rest of your compositions?
Well, film is very unique because one gets a finished product and then one has to write for it. It's very different from any kind of collaboration where there's really a back and forth. Because with film, I mean, sometimes you might get an early cut just to start getting some ideas, but you really need to have all the timings in place before you can actually write, so that you're not chasing after the directors in the middle of sequencing something. So one gets a finished product and then one has to somehow fit one's own vision into something that's almost ready. It's a very different kind of approach, and there the question is, how do I try to bring out and enhance things that are already there, instead of trying to impose my own vision on something which might not respond to it very well. So this is very much what I tried to do, and almost do this kind of experiment that if I were to close my eyes and listen to the music that I wrote, do I see what I would otherwise be seeing on the film?
Interesting.
So,
Interesting. And the film in question?
So, for example, one film that I'm thinking about right now is this very abstract short film I did called Walking Painting with Fabienne Verdier, who is an absolutely remarkable painter. And she developed this very interesting technique of painting which involves gravity. So it actually tries to get into the material, into the materiality of paint. And what she does is she actually applies paint through a funnel, a kind of funnel, from a distance onto the canvas, and as it hits the canvas it creates these interesting reverberations and kind of volcanic shapes, and she can adjust how wide the funnel is and the direction it goes in and so forth, and this film actually slows down this moment of the paint hitting the canvas and really shows these incredible patterns. So I was thinking, okay, how am I going to reflect this in music? And I had two options. Either I would try to mimic what I was seeing as closely as possible, something we tend to call Mickey Mousing in films. So, you know, like in cartoons where, you know, if you move your hand to the right, there's one note, and then you fall down this ditch, and then there's another sound. So everything is copied in a musical sense. Or do I step back from it and create an abstract picture of what's going on in a slightly kind of refracted manner? And that's what I felt would be more true to her own intentions. So I came up with a kind of score that tried to stay as close to the spirit of what it was that she was doing, without copying what was on the screen too closely, because that's something you already see. So I think what the music should do is perhaps give another layer of meaning to what you're seeing, rather than just translating the visuals into a musical soundtrack as faithfully as possible.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Now, with your winning of the Honens Piano Competition, Nicolas, do you have any recording contracts or projects
Oh,
in the
yes.
offering?
Yeah, Honens will be releasing on their own label recordings from the competition, and I will have my debut recording with Hyperion.
Very exciting.
Yes, and we are now in discussions about scheduling and programming and all
And
that.
programming,
And then
yeah.
it's all very exciting. And,
Will you be
and
doing some of your own own compositions?
It's possible. We'll see. We'll see. There are a number of different possibilities that we're looking at. So we are figuring out the best options for the debut CD. But I have my recitals coming up next season in places like Carnegie and Wigmore and the Concerthouse Berlin, and my compositions will certainly feature on those programs. So I will be presenting myself as a composer, pianist composer.
So now
in all of those.
We've heard about you as being the Wunderkind and the auteur
Well.
here in film scoring, and your compositions. Everything sounds like it's in balance, but to get the real balance, what are you? What is a normal day like for you, Nicolas?
Well, so of course I have time set aside to practice, though I don't like to practice more than 4 hours a day, at least at the piano. I feel like more than that can be a bit counterproductive, like the law of diminishing returns starts to kick in after too many hours. But I do a lot of practice mentally, actually, away from the instrument, so that's a big part of what I do. And of course I have time set aside for composing when I can. But there are other things that are central to my regimen, my routines, such as yoga, exercising. I'm big on qigong and tai chi and all that. I'm very interested in, and I'm big on meditation as well.
Fabulous.
It keeps me.
You're finding your inner self and keeping it.
Oh, yes, and especially when one is playing competition round after competition round, or flying into some place and playing a concert that day, or all that. You know, it's a difficult profession because one has to deal with a lot of discomfort and sleepless nights and uncomfortable hotel beds, but then step onto the stage and be ready to...
And be brilliant.
Be brilliant and take yourself and the audience to somewhere else.
And you have Nicolas Namoradze. We found out through this interview that you are immortal, and I'm thrilled to that because you bring your humanity. And even though his work as a pianist and composer suggests that he has been on this earth for a lifetime, he is only beginning. And the beauty is that we have a lifetime of listening to him as we watch his rise to fame. Nicolas Namoradze, I want to thank you for being on center stage.
Thank you so much.
We're going to go out with one of your pieces.
Yes.
An etude?
This will be, yes, my third piano etude, Moving Mirrors, and I think we will hear the very end of the piece.
Thank you so much. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on center stage.